Welcome back everyone. Last time in my last review I reviewed my Razer Huntsman Mini, but today it's the big one. I will be reviewing my PC today, my entire rig, and it's a kind of a high-end rig, but I wanted to put this out there so that a lot of people who maybe are not that experienced with builds or don't know what parts to pick can sort of bounce some ideas off of this. So I'll be talking about each and every single component in this in detail, as well as the case and everything itself, and round about how much it should cost as well. Let's start with the exterior. The case itself is a Phanteks Eclipse P500A. Now this features a tempered glass side panel that's removable, and also it's like a swinging door, so it has magnets on the back which attach it to the case, so if you leave it, it just snaps on. The other thing is we have an exhaust at the top which has a mesh wire dust filter. Again, this is also magnetic. So this goes on the top for any of your intakes, if you have any intake coming out from the top. Its main selling point though, however, is the mesh front panel. So it acts not only as a dust filter, but it also provides a lot of airflow to your machine, especially for higher end rigs. This is very important because especially with the components in this particular system, it needs quite a lot of cooling. Moving on, I would like to talk about the two variations of this case. So the Eclipse P500A comes in two variations, which is just the original, and then there's one which is called the DRGB version, which is what I have. So that RGB obviously kind of gives it away. It has digital RGB fans. So if I were to get, for example, just the normal P500 Eclipse, these fans that you see in the front, which are included on both cases, would not have RGB. Talking about the case itself, it comes included with three 140mm fans in the front. And the DRGB version, see again, this is where the variation comes in. The DRGB version has RGB fans, whereas the normal P500A Eclipse has just normal PWM fans. And the color variation also varies, so this case comes in both black and white. But I believe the white is only for the DRGB version. Next up, I wanted to talk about the cooling, since that's kind of the theme that we have going right now. It's very important to have a proper cooling, you can say, path for your air to go through. Because a lot of times what happens is if you have, for example, I have a normal just PWM fan in the back, and then these fans in the front obviously are pulling air through. So now if I had that fan as an intake as well, then there would be a conflict of air in between. So the configuration of cooling that I have in my system right now is that these fans are pulling air in. These three big 140mm fans are pulling air in. Then I have this PWM fan at the back as an exhaust. So this is pulling air in and this is pulling it out. And then I also have a third exhaust upwards from where I showed the mesh. Talking about the mesh, my third exhaust port is actually my AIO. So that's an all-in-one cooler. It's a liquid cooler. And the cooler of choice that I chose was the Lian-Li Galahad. It has obviously it has a 240mm radiator, so it has two fans of 120mm. However, this case can support I believe a 360mm fan or radiator on the top as well. So you can have a 3-fan radiator on the top, as well as one here. So this has a 480mm radiator capacity. And the top can support up to three, I believe, 120mm fans, and or two 140mm on top, and then obviously you have the 140s here anyway. So the Lian-Li Galahad, served me very well. I have it as an exhaust, so it'll be pulling the cooler in to cool the liquid so that my CPU doesn't get too hot. And overall, I just like the aesthetic of it, and obviously since it's an AIO cooler, you get the best of both worlds, liquid cooling as well as air cooling. So yeah, Lian-Li Galahad was just one that I chose because I found it aesthetically pleasing, and obviously it has good performance as well. Alright, next up I have a Ryzen 5 5600X. So X meaning the unlocked version, so all of you, overclockers out there can go crazy with this. So the reason I chose that was mainly I was going to be doing gaming on the system, and I don't need a 64 core, machine like CPU for this machine. So 6 cores, 12 threads seems quite reasonable, and I don't think anyone needs a lot more than that for gaming. You can go 8 cores and 16 threads, but to be honest, I feel like that's a little excessive. Of course, the Ryzen 5 chips now have their new Zen 3 architecture. So this is the more updated version of, I guess you could say, the Ryzen 3. Obviously, they're newer. And again, like I said, the 5600X was affordable. And obviously, being X meaning I can overclock it as well. So mainly, I chose it because it's affordable and it's a little more, can't talk. It meets all the requirements of my specific PC. I needed it for gaming, and I really don't think that I need more than 6 cores for this work the workload on this machine. Okay, so now I want to talk about the motherboard, because obviously if you have a CPU, where's it gonna go? It's gonna go in the motherboard. So you can think of the motherboard as, you can think of the CPU as the brain of the computer, and the motherboard is the body of the computer. So the motherboard, all of the things in the computer are connected to it, and they are connected to the CPU via the motherboard. Now the motherboard of choice that I had was a TUF Gaming X570 Plus. So this motherboard, I think its VRMs are really good for cooling and things like that. That's why I chose it, as well as the AM4 socket. So AMD has announced that they'll continue support on their AM4 socket. So even the the newer generation CPUs that they'll come out with, maybe 6th, 7th gen, I don't know how many they're gonna come out with, but they will all be supported on the AM4 socket. So that was one of the main reasons that I picked this, and a reason I also picked the X570 over the B550. These are 2 chipsets, so the X570 is a little more of the premium one. It's just to ensure, I guess, against any malfunctioning. Not to say that B550 is bad, but I felt like paying that premium a little, that little more of a premium to get a better product was the better choice. So again, this, I will remind you, the X570 Plus does not have integrated Wi-Fi. I'd like to reiterate that because some of the beginners, they make a mistake where they think that every motherboard has Wi-Fi, which is not true, although most of them do have Wi-Fi these days, but some motherboards do not come with integrated Wi-Fi. Therefore, you should make sure whether your model has the integrated Wi-Fi card, and that will be mentioned in the product name. So there's the iteration of this motherboard which has Wi-Fi, actually it's called the X570 Plus Wi-Fi. So that lets you know that it has Wi-Fi in it. Otherwise, you'll either have to use an Ethernet port or an Ethernet connection like I do, or you're going to have to buy an external Wi-Fi card, which you're then going to have to install in one of your PCIe lanes. So after that, I'd like to talk about RAM. So RAM is, you can say it's volatile memory. So that's like the medium between your hard drive and your CPU. So it's like a medium between your storage and your CPU. Volatile meaning that whenever you shut down your computer, your RAM gets wiped clean. Anyway, let's not get too much into the technicalities. So I'll actually open up the computer here. So again, this has a swing door type panel, which you can just remove off the top like this. I'm just gonna place this to the side. So talking about RAM, the RAM that I have is the HyperX Fury line. So this is 16 gigabytes of RAM at, I believe, 3200 megahertz, which is their clock speed, which means how fast the speed of the RAM is. So usually in DDR4, so DDR4 is the latest generation of RAM. Actually, now they've come out with DDR5, but most consumer systems still use DDR4. So DDR4, it starts from around 2666 megahertz and goes up to 3600 megahertz, or sometimes even 4000. Although 4000 is more characteristic of DDR5. So these are two sticks of HyperX Fury RGB RAM. Each of them is 8 gigabytes. So in total, they combine to give a total of 16 gigabytes of RAM at 3200 megahertz, overclocked that is. And these RAM sticks, they have a latency, which is how much lag it takes or how much time it takes between your RAM to get information to your CPU. They have a latency of CL16, so that's what you'll usually find your RAM at, CL16. CL18 is a little slower and CL14 is a little faster, but CL16 is a good point to sit, and most consumer RAM, gaming RAM usually sits around that point. So 16 gigs. And if you notice, I have 4 RAM slots here, and I have these RAM sticks spaced out. So there's one RAM stick, then there's a slot empty, and there's a second RAM stick. So what that does is it's called dual channel memory. So what happens is your motherboard divides your 4 slots into 2 channels, channel A and channel B. So these are you can envision it as your CPU being a place, and these being 2 entrances for the crowd to come into. So dual channel allows more paths for the information to get to your CPU, therefore reducing congestion, and therefore it it gets the information from your RAM to your CPU more quickly. So for beginner builders, I would say just try to space out your RAM with 1 in between. The usual rule of thumb is to start from the slot which is you can say the furthest away from the CPU, leave 1 and then have 1 there, or you can do the other way around as well, closest, then 1, then the third one. But yeah, dual channel significantly, it increases your the speed of your RAM. I wouldn't say the speed of your RAM, but it has an effect on how fast your RAM can get data to your CPU, and a single channel will sometimes bottleneck your RAM usage as well. Right, the next thing I wanted to talk about is storage. Now, the storage you can't see in the system right now because I have 2 types of storage. One of them is in the basement here, which is accessed from the back, and the other one is actually underneath the graphics card. So I actually have 2 different storages. So what I recommend for most users would be to have 2 different storages. One of them would be for your Windows and boot files and things like that. So that's usually what most people keep, they keep a faster drive for that. So for example, in my system, I have I believe it's an ADATA 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD. So now NVMe SSDs, they're like these funny little sticks. They're this big, and they are right now the fastest form of SSD that is available. Crazy read and write speeds of I think the Samsung Evo ones are 7,000 megabytes per second, things like that. So the SSD, the NVMe SSD, is a very fast hard drive, which contributes to really fast boot times and things like that in your computer. So for when you turn it on, you'll get into Windows and get to accessing your computer pretty quickly. So like I said, I have about a 512 gigabyte SSD for my boot drive. We call it a boot drive because that's where you boot from into Windows. And then for my mass storage, that is, games or work files or things like that, or homework from school, things like that, I have a 2 terabyte Seagate hard drive. So the hard drive is really not that fast. It's actually one of the slowest mediums of storage. So it's hard drive, then there's the solid state drive, which is a bigger one, and then there's the NVMe solid state drive, which is the NVMe SSD. SSD stands for solid state drive. But yeah, I mean, for mass storage, I don't think I need that much speed, because even though, the hard drive is the slowest, it's not that slow. And again, there's grades between it. And I think Seagate came out with one recently, which is actually almost as fast as an SSD. Not an NVMe SSD, but a normal solid state drive. So I have a 2 terabyte Seagate drive for my mass storage. So that's where I keep all my games, and that's where I keep all my work files and things from school or things like that. And then most of my Windows files and boot stuff is on my SSD, my NVMe SSD. However, I do keep some of the games that I play a lot on my SSD as well, because for those games I want a fast boot time because I'm playing them very frequently. Right, so up next I want to talk about the power supply. So that's one of the most important components in your system. In terms of obviously it giving power to everything else. Without power supply you can't run anything. Where's the electricity going to come from? So the power supply that I have here is, I believe, an EVGA 850GM or P850GM, or yeah. So that's an 80 plus gold power supply. So these different certifications of 80 plus bronze, silver, gold, platinum describe how efficient your power supply is and how much energy it wastes in the form of heat or things like that. How much energy is lost. So a good rule of thumb is to get at least an 850 watt, an 80 plus bronze, because those are really good. And then if you want, you can get higher up ones as well. So there's silver, there's gold, there's platinum, things like that. So strictly speaking, for the graphics card and the system that I have, I don't exactly need an 850 watt power supply. But actually the graphics card that I have in here is a 3070, RTX 3070, which I'll get to later. And these new second gen cards for NVIDIA, the 30 series cards, actually they have a tendency to exhibit a power spike at certain times due to how powerful they are in their TDP or TDW and how much power they draw. So these spikes can oftentimes, they can trip up your power supply. So your power supply has a limit on it, which, if the current that is being drawn from the power supply exceeds that limit, the power supply automatically shuts it off, because it's a fail-safe to protect the rest of your components from getting fried or short-circuiting, or a fire starting in your computer and blowing up, things like that. Bad things happen. So that's why, although usually NVIDIA puts out like a specified, you can say like a specified rating for the power supply. So for example, for the 3070, they'll maybe say like you need a 650 watt power supply or a 750 watt power supply. But from what I read when I was researching for the components here from a lot of various different tech reviewers like Linus Tech Tips and other things like that, I read it's good to sit maybe 100 watts, 200 watts above what NVIDIA recommends, just to be safe. So again, I selected the 850 watt power supply because of those power spikes, and it's an 80 plus gold power supply. 80 plus gold, you really can't go wrong. To be honest, even 80 plus bronze, you can't go wrong. Right, coming to the last and the most anticipated part, I think, for most people when they think of a gaming machine, the graphics card. Now, the graphics card that I have in this is the RTX 3070. Now, the 3070 obviously is I guess you could say, their entry-level card for the 30 series. This was before the 3060 and the 3060 Ti came out. So I bought this actually at the height of the GPU shortage, so it was actually quite pricey. But even then, this thing is a freaking beast, to be honest. So again, it is powered by their Ampere architecture, NVIDIA's Ampere architecture, and it's seen as the 2080 Ti killer. So again, it's advertised as a graphics card that is known to be performing better than the 2080 Ti. If not, it usually performs better than 2080 Ti, but certain games it performs as well as the 2080 Ti. But yeah, definitely, even if it's not performing better than 2080 Ti, it's definitely, you can think of it as a revamped, more modern 2080 Ti, and it definitely performs very, very well. And it's to the point where I can run just about any game at max settings without any problems. However, there are a few games out there like Microsoft Flight Simulator or things like that that'll kill my system, but those are very demanding. But any normal game, you can run it on max settings. Like I have Battlefield 5 in the background here running at max settings, no problem at all. So again, this does very well. Again, it has the Ampere architecture. This is the ROG Strix version, so the coolers and everything on this are made by ROG, Asus ROG. And it's a triple slot card, so it might take a little more space in your system. It's got 3 fans underneath, and it has that characteristic, ow, I hit my hand on the fan. It has that characteristic flow-through design on the 30 series cards where the fans are pulling air in, and then it has a flow-through design where the air actually flows through the graphics card and out through an opening at the top here. You'll see that on the stock NVIDIA cards as well, the proprietary NVIDIA cards. They'll have a fan up here as well, and then they'll have I think one down here on the proprietary cards, which one is pulling air through here and the other one's exhausting at the top or something like that. This doesn't have a fan on the top, but it does have the exhaust on the top. So again, the 3 fans below are pulling the air through the card and out. And because this is not a proprietary card, it's not a stock card from NVIDIA, it does not use their new 12-pin connector. Instead, like the older generation cards, it uses 2 8-pin connectors, which I think will be a lot more convenient for people because the 12-pin connector hasn't been integrated as much into the GPU, space right now. And it also looks a little weird because it's like horizontal across and it's like angled like this on the proprietary cards. So you'll have your cables coming across like this. So it doesn't really look that nice. Some of the higher end cards like the 3080 or 3090 for the ROG Strix, they might use 3 8-pin connectors, but again, that's not a problem as long as it's an 8-pin. So it's not that big of a deal. One last thing I did want to mention is that I do use these custom sleeve paracord cables with the cable combs. So these are just for aesthetics. So I have this on my 8-pin motherboard power. I have this on my 24-pin for the CPU, and then the 2 8-pins for the graphics card. This is just an aesthetic thing, but I feel like it looks a little better. So yeah, I think that sums up everything in the system as of now. So when I bought this system around, this was the height of COVID, height of GPU shortage. That's why mainly the, the RTX 3070 was pretty expensive. So this cost me around $3,000 to $2,500. Mostly, I think it was $3,000, which was a little expensive. But I believe now, there's less of a GPU shortage. It's still there, but it's not as much. So I think you guys will get this maybe by, I don't know, $2,500 or something like that. And I mean, of course, you can mix and match any of the parts in this. You can switch out systems. You can go, for example, for B550 motherboard or a lower grade graphics card. Like now we have the 3060 or the 3060 Ti, which is a little cheaper, and you're not really sacrificing much performance. You're not leaving much performance on the table. So of course you can mix and match things. But yeah, this exact system I think will cost you around maybe $2,500 to $2,000. It's definitely a high-end system, but I'll definitely say it's worth it. I'm very happy with this machine. Now the last thing I wanted to touch up upon was the monitor. So I'll have a detailed review of this coming soon, but I thought I'll just talk about the preview since it's here already and it's on. So this here is an LG Ultra Gear 144 Hz monitor. So while, I mean, again, the 3070 can push higher than 144 frames in a lot of games. Most games, I feel like I don't need that much difference. There's a big jump between 60 and 144, but a lot of people have said they did an experiment with LTT and Shroud and things like that. The jump from 144 to 240 is not that big. So again, I don't really play games that competitively. I play them more casually, just for fun with friends. So I thought, a 144 Hz system would be nice. Again, this is a 27-inch monitor, and its resolution is 2560 by 1440p. So it has good color quality as well. Very vivid colors. It does have HDR as well, and I believe it's HDR 600, if I'm not mistaken. And so 27 inches, and it's a very reliable machine. Again, this monitor, I've had no problems with it whatsoever. It's not as big as some of the other ones. Some people like bigger monitors, a 49-inch, like the G9 Odyssey. That's the curved one, it's crazy. But especially for entry level, I think this is good. And even for some of the more casual, medium level builders, this is a great monitor. So I'll be having a detailed review of this soon. Alright, so that's about it for this beast of a machine, my buddy, my partner in crime for gaming. Before I go though, I'd like to mention a few people. I can't forget my uncle, his name is Faraz. He was the one who actually helped me out with a lot of the specifications. He's a very experienced builder. He's actually a game developer, so he has, he's built quite a few PCs in the past. And he's very experienced with things like this. I mean, I did my own research, but again, he was like a consultant. I bounced all my ideas off of him, and he was the one who, you know, took all of the things and kind of narrowed it down for me. He also introduced me to a company, shout out gearup.me. So this is one of the greatest companies here in the Middle East for those of us who unfortunately could not get our parts on like individually. So I had this machine custom built by gearup.me. So this is a UAE based company where they do custom builds for you, and they also have their own pre-builds. You send them your parts, your specifications, and they'll build it to you and ship it out to you in record time. I had no problems whatsoever with them. I'd also like to shout out Mr. Liddell. He was the, you know, like the, you can say the salesman who was involved with me. He is, I believe, the head of the building department there. So they all oversee, you know, all of the builds that are going on. They actually have a 24-hour stress test for each of the machines that they send out before they send it out to make sure none of the parts are malfunctioning and that the machine can take stress. Very customer oriented, very prompt. He was always very punctual. As soon as I put any, you know, pinged any message off of him, he would be there immediately to answer my queries. And in fact, he actually helped with my cousin's build as well. And the quality control and cable management at the back, everything's beautiful. And yeah, definitely go check those guys out. I'll leave a link in the description below for those of you, especially in the Middle East, who are, you know, looking to get a PC built or are not confident enough to build your own PC. This is a great alternative because you can give them your parts. You'll have everything, you know, your way, but except the only thing is it's being built by a professional builder, so you have none of the fear that, you know, anything is gonna break. So again, shout out gearup.me, shout out my uncle Faraz for helping me on this journey, and I will see you guys next time.